Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Abidemi, and today we'll be taking a look at the topic, the theories of economic development. All right, so this is a very important topic because it's very useful for students, for researchers, academicians. It helps us to understand what are some of the factors that drives um, economic development, or what are some of the factors that hinders economic development theoretically. Okay, so let's write on. We're going to take a look at um, these theories. Number one, vicious circle theory of poverty, or simply vicious circle theory. Rostow's linear stages of growth model. This should be quite popular. Number three, theories and patterns of structural change. Number four, the international dependence revolution. Number five, the neoclassical free market counter-revolution. Number six, the big push theory. And number seven, the O-ring model. So let's take a look at the first one, the vicious circle theory. The vicious circle theory of poverty states that economic development is hindered because poverty has a negative impact on the demand and supply side of the economy. On the supply side, because incomes are low, consumption cannot be diverted to savings for capital accumulation, and lack of capital results to low productivity per person or worker, which results in low levels of income. Thus, the circle is complete. Okay, the circle goes back again. Because of low incomes, you have low consumption, you have low savings, you have low capital accumulation, leads to low productivity per worker, and leads to low income again. All right, so it keeps going in circle. Of course, that tells you one thing. Uh, income, the income an individual earns is so crucial to that person's well-being. Okay, the income a person earns is very crucial to that person's well-being or welfare, or improving that person's welfare. The lower the income, of course, the lower the welfare, or the lower the living standard. Okay, so income is very important. So if the government is going to design policies, government wants to design policies in such a way that it will have a direct impact on the income of the people. It will it will create policies that will increase people's income, right? Thus, the circle is complete. Now, what about the demand side? On the demand side, because incomes are low, the production of consumer goods and services are low. Because if people don't have money to buy, for example, goods or afford services, of course, the businesses will almost close up because they wouldn't also produce. That's what it means. You see, resulting in low investment, domestic or international, and productivity. These low incomes continue, therefore, the circle is complete. Okay, so the criticism of this theory is that savings should not only be examined from a personal angle. There can be corporate saving, government saving, public enterprise profit, social security contributions, life insurance premiums, and provident and pension fund reserves. If we look at saving from a broader point of view, there are additional arguments to suggest that poor countries have a substantial capacity to save. In addition, it is essential to state that the level of consumption is not always determined by income earned. Individuals can borrow to keep up with the Joneses in society. They can spend beyond their income. This is called the demonstration effect. Okay? So we go to Rostow's linear stages of growth model. The most influential and outspoken advocate of the stages of growth model of development was the American economic historian Ward W. Rostow. According to Rostow, the transition from underdevelopment to development can be described in terms of the series of steps or stages through which all countries must proceed. The sequence of development that Rostow outlines include the following five stages: the traditional society, the preconditions for change or take-up, the drive to maturity, the age of high mass production and consumption. Right. So let's take a look at the traditional society. In our previous class, or in one of the classes where we were talking about poverty, inequality, and development, we talked about the traditional society. And what does the traditional society entail? So a traditional society characterized by subsistence agriculture, all right, you see, I mentioned that in one of our classes, with intensive labor. Okay, it doesn't have high level of technology, or it doesn't have better ways of doing things, so you still need to make use of maybe a lot of people in the farm rather than getting high tech or high kind of high equipment that can enable you to produce much faster. All right, so a traditional society is characterized by subsistence agriculture with intensive labor and low levels of trade, in which most live on small farms, are mostly focused on local concerns, and remain largely disconnected from the rest of the world. Also, also, such a society is characterized by a population that does not have a scientific perspective on the world and technology. Right? They are not open to what is happening around the world. Okay, they are kind of still um, engulfed within their local community. So number two is preconditions for takeoff. What are some of those characteristics? Initial manufacturing stage, beginning of trade, new ideas, emergence of banks, or society still dominantly a traditional society. So number three, takeoff. It's a short period of massive disruptive societal change in which industrialization accelerates, high profits are reinvested in new technologies, often brought in from external forces. So the massive disruptive social change could be things related to maybe technological shocks. All right. One of the principal strategies uh, of development necessary for any takeoff was the mobilization of domestic and foreign savings in order to generate sufficient investment to accelerate economic growth. Rostow explained that countries that were able to save 15 to 20% of GDP could grow at much faster rate than those who save less. Moreover, this growth will then be self-sustaining. So what is self-sustaining growth? Self-sustaining growth is the growth that continues over a long run based on savings, investment, and complementary private and public activities. Right. So what a country wants to do is a country wants to get to a stage where um, its growth is self-sustaining. The investment that it has made is able to sustain the growth of the economy. And that comes by savings, because savings leads to capital accumulation, okay, investment, of course, and it complements private and public activities. Number four, drive to maturity. It takes place over a long period of time. As standards of living rise, economic growth outpaces population growth, use of technology and education increases, and the national economic grows and diversifies. All right. So, for example, irrespective of where you are from, take a uh, do an analysis of your country. What stage is it right now for your country? All right. What stage are you? Could it be the traditional? Of course, we know developed countries are more in the fifth stage because they produce and they consume and they export to the rest of the world. But for developing, they are still within the area of the preconditions for takeoff. They are still within the area of preconditions for takeoff, and drive to maturity. They are within that band. Okay, some are still trying to take off like a plane. All right, they are trying to take off. All right, they're trying to take off. And the fifth stage is age of high mass consumption. I usually say age of high mass production and consumption, because what developed countries do is that they produce and they consume and they export to the rest of the world. Of course, that's how it should be. All right. At the time of writing, Rostow believed that Western countries most notably the United States, occupy this last developed stage. Here, a country's economy flourishes in a capitalist system characterized by mass production and consumption or consumerism. So the difference between developed countries and developing countries, well, one of the differences is that for developing countries, they they it's there's every tendency that they just focus on consumption. Of course, they might be producing things, but that what they produce might not have a lot of weight when it comes to international trade. All right, or my such of their trade might not be structured well in such a way that is going to benefit them. All right, and so for developing countries, sometimes they get so much fixated on uh, consumption. And one of the reasons why they might do that is because maybe they have a lot of money to borrow. Okay, so if you have a lot of money to always borrow, sometimes you don't sit down as a leader or as a country to find out, oh, what can we do to raise our own money? Of course, credit is part of uh, the international financial system. But countries must be able to find a way, how can we generate low cost funds to be able to foster our economic activities, maybe to build roads, to build bridges, to build parks. There has to be low cost funds to do that. And that type of thinking drives uh, innovative abilities, right? So, but for developed countries, they are always doing research. They invest a lot in research and development. Okay, so they are always wanting to come up with products that will be able to provide solutions to recent problems. And that is how we should think. Every country of the world must be able to bring something to the table. What can we produce that will be used by the rest of the world in such a way that when they take a look at it, everybody will say, for example, this cup, for example, just an example, they'll be able to say this cup is from Nigeria, or this is from the US, or this is from the UK, or this is from Ghana, or I mean, everyone's got to bring something to the table. Okay, country doesn't want to find itself where it is driven by consumption. It's not a good place to be. You must produce, consume part of what you produce, or import what you cannot produce, but you must also be exporting to the rest of the world. Okay, so let's take a look at structural change models. Structural change theory focuses on the mechanism by which underdeveloped economies transform their domestic economic structures from heavy emphasis on traditional subsistence agriculture to a more modern, more urbanized, and more industrially diverse manufacturing and service economy. All right, so I already mentioned there's nothing wrong with being an agricultural society, but agriculture must be done in a way, in such a way that that country is moving with the development of the other countries. Okay, your agriculture must be top notch. So, for example, if a country has more of agricultural resources as a strength, then that country wants to ensure that it cultivates or it engages or it improves its agricultural system in such a way that it will be able to compete with the rest of the world, or it will be able to export its agricultural produces at at good prices, to the rest of the world. Two well-known representative examples of the structural change approach are the two-sector surplus model, which is theoretical model of Arthur Lewis, and the patterns of development empirical analysis of Olis B. Chenery et al. So the Lewis theory of economic development. In the Lewis model, the underdeveloped economy consists of two sectors: a traditional, overpopulated rural subsistence sector, and a high productivity modern sector characterized by surplus labor, and to which this surplus labor is transferred. The focus of the model is on the process of surplus labor transfer from a traditional sector, which leads to the growth of output and employment in the modern sector. Lewis calculated that with an increase of 30% or more in the urban wages, workers will migrate from the rural areas to the urban areas, which will lead to growth in output employment through the modern sector. What about the structural change and patterns of development? In structural change and pattern of development, in addition to the accumulation of capital, both physical and human, a set of interrelated changes in the economic structure of the country are required for the transition from a traditional economic system to a modern one. These structural changes involve all economic functions, including the transformation of production and changes in the composition of consumer demand, international trade, and resource use, as well as changes in social economic factors such as urbanization and the growth and distribution of a country's population. Okay? So development shows certain patterns. For instance, a shift away from agriculture to industrial production, the steady accumulation of physical and human capital, the change in consumer demands from emphasis on food and basic necessities to manufactured goods and services. This leads to the growth of cities and urban industries as people migrate from the rural to the urban regions with a decline in overall family size and the rate of population growth. So let's take a look at the international dependence revolution. Essentially, international dependence models view developing countries as beset by institutional, political, and economic rigidities, both domestic and international, and caught up in a dependence and dominance relationship with rich countries. Within this general approach are three major streams of thought: the neoclassical dependence model, the forced paradigm model, and dualistic development thesis. The neoclassical dependence model, dependency theory argues that underdevelopment in developing countries, so periphery, is not simply due to internal factors, but is significantly influenced by the historical and ongoing economic, political, and cultural control exerted by more developed countries, the center or the core. What about the forced paradigm model? The forced paradigm model proposes that developing countries have failed to develop because their development strategies, usually given to them by Western economies, have been based on an incorrect model of development. One that, for example, overstresses capital accumulation or market liberalization without giving due consideration to needed social and institutional change. All right, so these are self-explanatory. That's why I'm just reading them out. The dualistic development thesis. So dualism means two. I mean, for example, up and down, left and right, black and white. And so within the society, you would also have two extremes. For example, you not necessarily extreme, but you might have rich and poor, or you might have very rich and very poor. Dualism is the existence and persistence of substantial and even increasing divergences between rich and poor nations on various levels. Overall, the dualistic development thesis suggests that targeted interventions are necessary to reduce inequalities. All right, we've done. If you check my YouTube channel, you will see income inequality, and of course, in income inequality, we mentioned that when we're talking about the Lorentz curve, the 45-degree line, okay, the more income is equal. Of course, you have elements of income inequality within the country, but the more people income are kind of distribution are close, the better for the economy. All right, the better for the economy. You don't want a situation where you have the people are earning extremely high and another people are extremely low. Okay, that gap is too wide, and that has uh, disadvantages for a society. Okay, so the dualistic development thesis suggests that targeted interventions are necessary to reduce inequalities and foster balanced, inclusive economic development. So let's take a look at the fifth one, the neoclassical free market counter-revolution. Contrary to the claims of the dependence theories, the neoclassical counter-revolutionaries argue that developing world is underdeveloped not because of predatory activities of the developed world and the international agencies that it controls, but rather because of the heavy hand of state and the corruption, inefficiency, and lack of economic incentives that permeate the economies of developing nations. Let me take that again. Contrary to the claims of the dependency theories, the neoclassical counter-revolutionaries argued that the developing world is underdeveloped, not because of the predatory activities of the developed world and the international agencies that it controls, but rather because of the heavy hand of the state and corruption, inefficiency, and the lack of economic incentives that permeate the economics of developing nations. All right, it's in both ways. Okay, a country doesn't want a situation where it's depending on other countries for its survival. All right. So you don't want to depend on, just like an individual, you don't want to depend on others for everything. That takes away your self-esteem. That takes away your dignity. That takes away your ability to think or innovate. You don't want to do that. So even as individuals, we want to have element of stability within our lives in such a way that we can get to do things we would like. Okay. And at the same time, you don't want a society where corruption is what drives everything that is being done there. You don't want that kind of society. So you don't want a kind of over dependency on other countries, and you don't want a situation where a country, its public officials, even the citizens are highly corrupt. You don't want that kind of society because that kind of society hinders economic development, even hinders economic growth. Okay. So, but the neoclassical free market counter-revolution are saying that, hey guys, it's not about being dependent on other countries or um, other countries controlling the affairs of others. No, it's not about that. It's about the state's corruption, inefficiency, and lack of economic incentives. Meaning that maybe there's no free market. Okay, the state's hand is in everything. That's what it's trying to say. The neoliberals argue that by permitting competitive free markets to flourish, privatizing state-owned enterprises, promoting free trade and export expansion, welcoming investors from developed countries, and eliminating the plethora of government regulations and price distortions in factor, product, and financial markets, we stimulate economic efficiency and economic growth. All right, so the neoclassical proposes a free market where the buyers and sellers are free to interact with one another. The government should just create the environment, let things work out, let things play out. Okay? Naturally. All right, let things play out naturally, based on driven by the self-interest of individuals or by firms or by the government themselves. So the neoclassical counter-revolution can be divided into three approaches: the free market approach, the public choice approach, and the market-friendly approach. So for the free market approach, this approach argues that the priorities of an economic system operating with free market often under assumption that an regulated market performs better than one with government regulation or government intervention. We all need, from time to time, would always need the government intervention, right? But government should create policies that should drive innovation. Government should create a suitable environment that will drive innovation. The government should create regulations that will protect the rights of citizens, that will protect the property rights. Okay. The government should create policies that will ensure that the goods and services that are available within the country contributes to the health of the population. Right. But innovation should be encouraged. A public choice theory or new political economy approach. This theory argues that governments can do virtually nothing right. Of course, the reason why I'm sure that is being said is because of the corruption that is happening in countries. All right. I'm sure with the right orientation, with the right orientation, the government should be able to do something right. This is because public choice theory assumes that politicians, bureaucrats, citizens, and states act solely from self-interested perspective. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with self-interest, but self-interest must translate to societal development. Okay, so this is because public choice theory assumes that politicians, bureaucrats, citizens, and states act solely from a self-interested perspective, using their power and the authority of government for their own selfish ends. Citizens use political influence to obtain special benefits called rents from government policies, e.g., import licenses or ration foreign exchange that restrict access to important resources. Politicians use government resources to consolidate and maintain positions of power and authority. Bureaucrats and public officials use their position to extract bribes from rent-seeking citizens and to operate protected businesses on the side. Finally, states use their power to confiscate private property from individuals. The net result is not only a misallocation of resources, but also a general reduction in individual freedoms. The conclusion, therefore, is that minimal government is the best government. So, neoclassical is saying that minimal government is the best government. So, what about the market friendly approach? The notion historically promulgated by the World Bank that successful development policy requires government to create an environment that's investing in physical and social infrastructure, health, care facilities, educational institutions, and by providing a suitable climate for private enterprise in which markets can operate efficiently and to intervene only selectively in the economy in areas where the market is inefficient. Yeah, that is a market-friendly approach. That is a much better approach. That the government should intervene, for example, when there are shocks. But the government does intervene when there are shocks. Rodan raised uh, yeah, six, the big push theory. Rodan raised some of the basic coordination issues. He pointed out that several problems associated with initiating industrialization in a subsistence economy. He stated that coordination failure problem works against successful industrialization, a counterweight to the push of development. Big push occurs when the developing economies advance on many fronts at the same time. The key to growth is thinking big, and it's not about gradual growth, moving from underdeveloped or developed straight to developed. Rodin theory supports the increase in returns to scale hypothesis. That is, the more economic activity you undertake, the more profitable the remaining economic activities. What are coordination failures? Coordination failure occurs when individuals or firms in an economy fail to coordinate their actions, resulting in outcomes that are suboptimal or inefficient for the economy as a whole. In developing economies, this often means that economic agents like businesses, investors, or the government doesn't invest or take actions that will be mutually beneficial because they are waiting for others to act first. How to push an economy? According to Roden, government investment on a large scale, building infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and dams, an open trade which has the capacity to support the new factories or industries. So the big push is saying that the country can move from underdeveloped straight to developed based on some factors. And some of the factors that can limit that is what is called coordination failures. And coordination failures occurs or coordination issues occurs when individuals or firms or even the government do not do what they need to do. For individuals, they might not take responsibility of the things that needs to be done. For firms, instead of them building factories, they might be waiting for other business to come and do that first. And that leads to coordination failure. That does not allow resources to be efficiently allocated. That leads to inefficiency. And that limits economic development. Okay? So, what are the criticisms of the big push theory? It neglects agriculture. Agriculture is a very large part of developing countries. Government planning sometimes do not go as planned. Neglects corruption, neglects culture. Most growth comes in gradual forms. And the last one is Michael Kremer's O-ring model. The name of Kremer's model is taken from the 1986 Challenger disaster, in which the failure of one small, inexpensive part caused the space shuttle to explode. In summary, the O-ring model shows that for an economy to be productive, it's crucial that all tasks are performed well, and this often depends on the skills of the workers. Improving skills leads to better overall performance and economic growth. In simple terms, everybody must do their job. Everybody must do their job. Individuals must take up their responsibilities within the society. The firms must take up their responsibilities within the society. And the government must also take up their responsibility within the society. If the individual doesn't do his job, of course, it's going to limit economic growth and development. If the firms do their job and the individuals don't do their job, that's also going to limit the extent at which the economy grows. If the individuals and the firms do their job and the government does not do their job, that even worsens the economy as a whole. All right. So, for an economy to develop or grow, every hand has to be on deck. It is both the responsibility of the citizens, it is both the responsibility of the firms, and it's also the responsibility of the government. Okay? And these are the references. So I hope you find this instructive or you've learned something from this. All right. So uh, feel free to ask questions if you want to ask. And feel free to also let me know if you want to collaborate on research related to economic development. I mean, in the coming years. All right. So I'll see you in our uh, following lectures. All right. Have a wonderful day. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Bye and God bless.